Okay, gang, the ball's in your court.
I remember I heard you speak about your personal story one time. And you said at that time you were in Kippah Suga. So I just wanted to know what made you change from Kippah Suga to Hasidic dress.
Well, it's a long story. It's not on my website, but briefly, I came in by very gradual stages. And my Rabbi Zatzal, the Boston Rabbi, never pushed me to move in any particular direction, particularly not to take on his minhagim, his customs. Never gave me any indication of that. After I got my BA, I took off a year and spent a year at Merkaz Rav Kook, which was, of course, that kind of modern Orthodox orientation. I came back with that orientation, got my PhD, became a professor. So modern Orthodoxy seemed to be just exactly the right balance that I needed. But then I had a series of very challenging experiences. I was teaching at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, and I was living in the Frum community. Many of the people there were graduates of Ner Yisrael Yeshiva, and we used to discuss things, or argue about things, or battle about things, you know. And there was a very depressingly consistent outcome that I lost every battle. And I don't like to lose. And it became clear after a while that I just had inferior material. The material in which I was basing my beliefs, my orientation, was just inferior to theirs. So I began exploring more and more the basis for what their attitudes towards things. And I found that they had much better command of information, much better scholarship, much better logic. And so gradually I began to gravitate in their direction. Now all this time, Boston Rabbi is my Rabbi, so if I'm going to make a move towards a Haredi lifestyle, and besides, it fit my personality because I have a lot of different interests, like music, for example. So I then felt that I wanted to more obviously identify with the Haredi lifestyle, and particularly to take on Haredi dress. So I asked my Rebbe for permission to put on Haredi dress, particularly Hasidic dress, and he said no. He said no for several years. Then I had a sabbatical in 1977. I came to Eretz Yisrael for 8 months, preparatory to making Aliyah. And he said, while you're in Eretz Yisrael, then you could switch. I guess he felt that it would look less like a pure instability and more like something inspiring and based on a context. I was learning in the Mir Yeshiva at that time. I was teaching at the University simultaneously, writing a book also at the same time. It was like triple existence. And that's when I got the permission to adopt the Haredi life, particular Hasidic dress. Still, when I went to campus, I had my tzitzis inside with the garment inside with the strings outside, and I wore a black yarmulke, but that was it.
You didn't wear a black hat?
No.
No, just that for me, it's like very hard for someone to say like I don't want to be sweating in the summer.
Well, I think you put it well. It may be hard for you because it may make you feel personally uncomfortable, but you put it well. There can't be any, in principle, objection against wearing hot clothes in the summer. What then shall we say about judges sitting on the bench in long black robes in Tennessee 100 years ago before air conditioning? Were they masochists? Were they somehow self-destructive or somehow just all stupid? Or performing classical music, which I did before air conditioning, under hot lights, you didn't do it in T-shirts and shorts.
With the example of the judges, I guess they have to, or else they're fired. But Hashem says if you don't dress already,
it's not because they're in Iran and the mullahs say you have to do that. It's a democratic country. The laws and the customs are supported by popular vote. People have something in mind. And what about when you graduate and you get a degree and you wear long black robes in June in Miami before air conditioning, and you wear those absolutely lunatic black hats, with the tassels, right? Is that also just some kind of religious dogma or some kind of, are they all on drugs or something?
That's one day. Every day.
So why should you make yourself uncomfortable for one day? Right?
One day.
Stupidity isn't an excuse because you only did it for one day.
Even on Purim they dress up one day.
Okay, is that for the same reason? Is there any common background between them? We're talking now about people who have no religious commitments who do this. Fact is that dress expresses your attitude, the attitude of your society towards what you're doing. You don't dispense justice, put people in jail, deprive people of their property, their rights, as a casual thing that you do after the third martini. It's a matter of a crucial social value, and the people who are going to dispense justice are given a special status. As it's said in American jurisprudence, a judge has to avoid even the appearance of impropriety. The rest of us don't have to do that. But people have to believe in the justice system. Beethoven is not the Beatles. You're playing Beethoven, you're playing something which is an international cultural treasure. Has been so for 250 years, and it will continue to be so. It's a privilege to play Beethoven. That's their attitude. The privilege should be expressed in the way you dress. By the way, there's another group that always dress in uniforms, and those are generals. You never see them in shorts and a t-shirt. No, it's a military uniform with all the medals and everything else, because they stand for something which in their eyes is crucial, important, valuable, and the dress should express that. And I think that's right. I think that's right.
That's only when they're working in the base.
Not at all. When they appear in public, when they meet with the president, when they go before Congress, they're always dressed like that.
When they're going to this grocery store, they dress up like that.
That depends on whether they're on duty. If they're on duty, yes, they do. When they're duty, they're in the uniform all the time.
I'm saying away from the base, home, just on duty.
Then they're not on duty. The judges don't do that either. Judges don't do that either, right? Because their lives are compartmentalized into the important parts and the trivial parts, and they only wear the formal clothes for the important parts. That's right, but our lives aren't compartmentalized like that. You serving Kodesh Baruch Hu is 24/7. So says the Rambam in Hilchos Deos, long before the Hasidic movement. It says you can serve God every day, all day. So the dress reflects. It's pointing out that there are links here to a culture which is not so easy to laugh at. Jews are famous at laughing at themselves, and sometimes the laughter is utterly inappropriate. And all of a sudden, you find Goyim doing the same thing, then people are less inclined to laugh at the Jews for doing it, even if they themselves are supposed to be part of the same group. Something funny there about the psychology and the values, but sometimes it's like holding up a mirror to a person and saying, hey, look, just exactly who are you talking about and exactly what are you talking about. And this is something that's recognized, and it is recognized quite internationally. I don't know all the cultures in the world, but the cultures that I know, there are special uniforms for people who have special, important, valuable functions.
People say like, oh, like you dress like a goy, but I could say, oh, like you dress like a. How the Jews learn how to dress like this? From the Polish goyim, from the Europeans.
Okay, first of all, every one of the questions you answered so far, I've answered. Right? Okay, they're in the wastebasket now. Right? I don't have to go back through them again. Moving from question to question sometimes gives the illusion that nothing's been settled. Everything you've raised so far has been settled. Okay. As far as that's concerned, the history of the matter is this. I'd like to keep score. As far as that, the mystery of the matter is this: the Russian Tsar made very strenuous efforts to convert or break the Jews in his regime. And in the middle of the 19th century, he made a decree that Jews from then on will have to dress like Goyim. And either that or go to prison camps in Siberia. And the Ger Hasidim rioted in the streets, and there were tens of thousands of them, or more. And so it was not a simple thing. Finally, a compromise was reached. We'll comply with the order if we get to choose the style. We can choose whatever non-Jewish style we want. The Tsar said, I don't care what style you pick. Okay, at that time, the Russian Empire included a great deal of what today is Poland. So the Jews in Russia proper chose to dress in the Polish style, and the Jews in what we call Poland dressed in the Russian style, so that even though, according to the letter of the law, they were dressing in a non-Jewish style, they were still different from all the local population. And that was the goal. The goal was that a Jew should be identified by his dress. So they satisfied the law in its legal terms and kept their distinct identity in terms of their dress in order to satisfy their own. And that's where it came from. Okay, let's go on to something else. Yeah.
I know you gave a shiur on this already, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the age of the universe as science sees it and as Judaism sees it, and how to reconcile the disparity between the two.
Okay.
Briefly.
Briefly. Now, you know, my training is in mathematical logic, so I'm a stickler for words. You talk about reconciling. That might not be the right goal. Reconciling might not be the right goal. Reconciling usually means we see how somehow both of them can be believed and accepted, and they both can be made consistent, and they're both taken on board equally. But that might not be the right goal.
Okay.
Whenever someone presents a conclusion, you have every right to ask him for his reasons. And one element in his reasons will be his assumptions. What assumptions are you making when you attack this issue? What are you taking for granted? One thing that the scientific world is taking for granted is that what we see as the laws of nature are constant. They have always been as they are today. So, if it takes 5 minutes for a raw egg to become hard-boiled in boiling water, 1,000 years ago, and 1,000,000 years ago, and 10 million years ago, and 100 million years ago, it took 5 minutes for a raw egg to become hard-boiled in boiling water. Because boiling water doesn't change, and eggs don't change, and coagulating proteins don't change. The laws of nature stay the same. We see the speed of light as it is today. The speed of light has always been the same. Force of gravity, always been the same, and so forth and so on. Melting point of lead, always been the same.
Those are the assumptions that scientists are going with.
That's right. That's right.
Assuming the same pressure, all that stuff, right? Same.
I said the laws of nature. You're talking now about particular facts. No, particular facts don't stay the same. The constitution of the seas changed. The constitution of the atmospheres changed. The average heat on the planet changes from time to time. No, facts don't stay the same, but the laws stay the same. Now, the laws tell you how things play out, how long it takes for something to happen. Half-life of radioactive elements. And that's supposed to be constant throughout. Well, that's an assumption. Now, it's a free world. You can make any assumption you want. But if you make an assumption, draw a conclusion, I don't have to bow down to that conclusion if it's just based on an assumption. Maybe the assumption is incorrect. Maimonides faced this problem in the guide, only he faced it much worse. Today, the estimate of the age of the universe is either 13.7 or 13.8 billion years. Maimonides' time, the accepted philosophical opinion for the age of the universe was infinity. That's a lot bigger than 13.8 billion. It's infinitely bigger. And it had the authority of Aristotle behind it. How did Maimonides manage to deal with the educated opinion that the world has no beginning? And here's what he did. He created a parable. This is part 2, chapter 17 in the guide. And the parable goes like this. A baby boy was born, and several months after he was born, his father took him to a community of only men. And when he grew up, he asked his father, where do we come from? He never saw any new people coming into existence, so he asked, where do we come from? Father told him, there are others who are like us in many ways, but different in a few. Every one of us starts out as a tiny miniature inside the abdomen of one of those, and after 9 months, comes out and then grows to be the way you see us. So the child asks, Daddy, or whatever language they spoke, while we're inside the abdomen of that other, can we breathe? Can we eat? Can we drink? And of course the father says no. So the son says, well then I know you're wrong. Everybody knows you stop breathing for 4 minutes, you're dead. Stop drinking for 2 weeks, you're dead. Stop eating for 2 months, you're dead. You're telling me that we were inside the abdomen of that other for 9 months without eating, without drinking, without breathing? Your story is impossible. You cannot be right. Now, given what the child knows, he's correct. In his world, nothing like that could happen. What's the answer? Life before birth is entirely different. It's an entirely different world. Operates on entirely different processes, entirely different principles. And he has no clue of that. Says Maimonides, what we read about in the Torah of the 6 days of creation is like the gestation of the universe. Gestation means period in the womb. It's the before birth of the universe. During the 6 days, things were operating in an entirely different fashion. So what we do is we take the laws of nature that we see now, which started operating the way we see them at the end of the 6th day, and we project them back into the 6 days, but that's utterly unreasonable. It's just like saying that there couldn't be gestation because you'd have to breathe, and if you can't breathe, you can't live. No, a fetus doesn't have to breathe. A fetus lives in another way, without breathing. The scientists don't know about that, so they just project backwards as if it was all the same thing. And by the way, Rabbi Eisenman found a quotation from Niels Bohr. Niels Bohr was one of the great founders of quantum mechanics in the 20th century. He's also Jewish, in addition to Einstein. And he said projecting back to the early history of the universe is not competent because the laws have been evolving. The laws have not been constant. They've been changing over time. And since the laws have been changing, we don't know how to deal with earlier periods where the laws then weren't the laws that we have today. So the scientific world makes its assumption and goes on with that assumption. As I said, it's a free world. You can make any assumptions you want. But I don't have to give up my position because you made an assumption. You made an assumption and I reject it. That's the brief way of putting it. And therefore, what we say is 5775 is correct, literally correct. And if you are hypnotized by the scientific picture, you're desperate for some kind of comfort, I can tell you what Rav Schwab said, which is certainly a perfectly acceptable thing to say. And he doesn't need me to give him a validation. He said, everything the scientific world describes that happened in their 13.8 billion years just happened much faster. In the 6 24-hour periods of the 6 days of creation, it happened millions or tens or hundreds of millions times faster. And if you'll tell me, but if they go so fast, they're going to violate laws of nature, we'll tell you, yes, exactly right. They're going to violate the laws of nature that we see today because our picture is that those laws weren't operating at that time. So that's one way to think. That's the way we have to do it. Yeah. On to the next.
There's a small question on that Moshel of the Rambam, that the kid, if you just studied a bit of science, you would know that we have a heart-lung bypass machine and we have drips. So it's not entirely unbelievable. So like
Heart-lung what?
Heart-lung bypass machine, meaning you don't need to breathe, you don't need a heart. And
you're talking about 900 years ago. And the point of the analogy was not to be good in the 21st century. The point of the analogy was if you have a limited set of experience and you generalize that to be universal, you're going to make mistakes. The point of it wasn't that the analogies work today. The point of it was when you have a limited set of facts at your disposal. You know, I forget who said this. I don't want to say who I think because I'm not quite sure I'm right, but someone said Aristotle got as far as the human mind could get without telescopes and microscopes. He was extremely brilliant, comprehensive. He knew all the facts and all the theories. He invented new theories for his time. But of course, if you don't have microscopes and telescopes, you're going to be crippled.
Let's get the Torah.
Oh, and the analogy was the whole of the scientific world without the Torah. It's like operating in his time without telescopes and microscopes. In fact, you're reading my mind. That's the next step. The next step is to say that those who are operating, looking at the world without the Torah. By the way, most of this I took from Rabbi Eisenman. He's a teacher. He wrote a wonderful book called Torah, Chazal, and Science, all 900 pages of it, and it is a classic. People sometimes object, but then if God made the world look much older than it really is, isn't he fooling us? As one competent philosopher of science put it, that would make God into a jokester God. Rabbi Eisenman said, on the contrary, the only person who's going to be fooled by the appearance of the universe is the person who refuses to listen to God. After all, he told us the truth. He told us the truth. This person says, I don't listen to God, I don't listen to religion, no, I'm only using my eyes, my instruments, and my logic, and then, if I get the wrong answer, somebody's at fault. Excuse me? God gave you the answer, and you're refusing to listen. Whose fault is that? Not his fault, it's your fault. And if you ask, where do we have the idea that God would create the world purposely looking other than it is, looking in such a way that by just examining it with your own observation, your instruments and your theories, you're not going to get the truth? Do we have any indication, other than the question at issue, With any indication that God would do such a thing? The answer is, of course we do. And probably everyone in this room knows it. Because it's in the Siddur. Is it popping into your minds what I'm talking about? God renews the work of creation continuously. Mechadesh Maisa Breshis Tamid. You say it after Baruch Hu in the morning, before the morning Shema, twice. Does the world look as if it's being constantly remade by God? It definitely does not. The world looks as if it carries itself. The world looks as if it just exists today because it existed yesterday and nobody annihilated it. Not that anything has to be done to keep it in existence. It doesn't look that way. So we know for sure that God creates the world one way, making it look another way. And this is just another example of that same phenomenon. Anyway, that's the short way to deal with the age of the universe. Yeah.
How do you answer Chazal's take of the geocentric view of the view of the world?
Well, first of all, I'm not sure that was their view. Ramchal has an essay on Agartha, and he says that Chazal were not interested in science, and when they spoke about scientific matters, they were hiding references to what we would call Kabbalistic matters, and they clothed them in the science of the day because it was some formal analogy, but had there been a different science that had found a different analogy, it's only a question of making an analogy. Number one. And number two, we are used to setting up a conflict or opposition between appearance and reality. Pay careful attention. Maybe that's only an appearance. Right? The reality isn't like that. You have a half-filled glass of water, and you put a knife in, and at the surface of the water, it looks as if the knife bends. You say, no, that's only an illusion. Notice the word only. That's only an illusion. It's not really bent. It's really straight. It only looks bent. That's just an illusion, just an appearance. Right? Okay, now, tell me. You have this glass of water, it's half full. You have the knife, and as you say, it looks as if the knife is bent. Someone comes over and stands right next to you. He looks at the glass and says, I don't see it. To me, it looks perfectly straight. He has a problem. He has a problem with his retina or his optic nerve or his brain. He's in serious trouble. You know why? Because from where you're standing, it really looks bent. That's how it really looks. And he's not getting it. When we talk about appearance and reality, what we forget is that an appearance is also a reality. What we have really are two different types of realities. One is what the thing is, so to speak, in and of itself. And the other is how it's affecting me, how it's interacting with me. Those are both realities. They're just different realities. And they're objective. As I said, a person standing next to me and says he sees the knife as straight is wrong because it doesn't look straight from where I'm standing. It really looks bent. If he doesn't get that, then he's got some problem. That means appearances are just as real as what we call realities, and you have to decide when you use one or the other. Let me give you one from Chumash. Rabbi takes in the three travelers. Did he know that they were angels? The natural feeling is no. Why not? How do you know that he... Why would you feed them? Angels don't eat. Yeah. Correct. That's the most natural assumption. As a matter of fact, the commentators are split. They're split. Some say he did know they were angels. If he knew they were angels, why would he feed them? Because, he says, God sent me angels looking like people. Why did he do that? Why did he send me angels looking like people? I guess because he wants me to treat them like people. Their appearance tells me how he wants me to treat them. And if that isn't obvious enough, let me give you a parable. President Barack Obama, in his desire to find out what the common man on the street thinks, without any prejudice, from time to time dresses up like a bus driver, and he goes out on the street with a suitable disguise, and asks people in Washington, how you doing, what's up, and what's news, and gets... Now, you happen to be a member of the Secret Service whose job is to protect Barack Obama's life. You're off duty, but as you saunter down the street in Washington, D.C., you notice someone ahead of you. You look at the build of his body, you look at the way he holds his head and his shoulders, the way he swings his arms, you think, that's no bus driver. That's the president. Okay, should you walk up to him and say, good evening, Mr. President? Probably not, because he's impersonating a bus driver to get the honest opinions of the people on the street. There, it's how he appears that dictates how you interact with him, not who he really is. Appearance is important. Appearance is a fact that sometimes you have to deal with. Now, I transfer that to our context. Let's say astronomy teaches you that the Earth is not the center of the universe, but it looks like it's the center of the universe. We experience it as the center of the universe. Even the New York Times every day reports the times of sunrise and sunset, doesn't it? Does the sun really rise? Does the sun really set? That would mean we're in the center. No, the Times will tell you. Of course, that's just the way of talking. You know why that's the way of talking? Because that's the way it looks. You stand there and watch the sunset and try to feel yourself rotating backwards away from the sun. You do that. The sun's going down. It's obvious. It's just going down. So we experience it that way. That's important also. Not trivial that we experience it that way. Everything that God created, He created for a purpose. And the fact that we experience ourselves being in the center is not zero either. So that's something else that maybe Chazal is talking about.
Maybe like the better question is like Chazal had Ruach HaKodesh, right? That means he could see, he has more abilities than the regular Jew, right?
Yes.
So my real question would be like, where does Ruach HaKodesh come in this place with like making an errors? If someone has making errors, how can we
let's see.
trust anything he says?
Let's see. Do Chazal ever make errors? Ever make errors on anything? This ought to be open and shut, right? Do Chazal ever admit making mistakes in halacha? Of course. Of course. Not only that, they contradict one another, and then they vote a majority against the minority. Minority has to accept the position of the majority. So Rava several times in Shas changes his mind. That means at least once he's wrong. He could be wrong the second time also. But he's older usually and has more background, so we don't take it that way. So of course they make mistakes. Chazal are only human. Say they have Ruach HaKodesh doesn't mean they had Ruach HaKodesh in everything that they said, and it certainly doesn't mean that they are always right. No human being is always right. And indeed, Rabbi Meisman in his book makes a careful distinction, which none of the reviewers paid attention to, between the scientific statements that Chazal make when they trace it back to prophecy versus the scientific statements that they make on their own. There are two kinds. When it's a scientific statement that goes back to prophecy, then it's true, period. And there is no argument, no discussion, and Chazal will not accept any challenge, and we shouldn't accept any challenge either. But that's only when it goes back to prophecy. And as the Rashba says, if you have a statement of Chazal that goes back to prophecy, and you have what is clear, observational, or scientific proof against it, then what you should do is say, there's a contradiction here, and I don't know how to reconcile it, but Chazal are right. I don't know how to reconcile it. That's all. Don't pretend, don't cook up artificial answers, don't abandon the Chazal, and just admit that it's a problem, and you don't know how to solve it. Lots and lots of problems have existed for hundreds or sometimes even more years, and then solutions have been found. So, just admit your own inability to solve the problem. But when it's a scientific statement in Chazal that does not have the backing of prophecy, and you can't know it unless you read the Rishonim. If you don't read the medieval commentators, you don't know. You can't tell from reading the Gemara itself. Now here's an example which the two of them are really side by side. There are 18 conditions which the Mishnah lists as called a treifa for an animal. And we have a rule that an animal that's a treifa can't live for a year. And those 18 go back to Moses. Somebody says he saw an animal with such a condition and he lived more than a year. Forget it. Forget it. We're not hearing that. Then there is such a thing as a treifa for a person. And it also has halachic consequences. What determines what is a treifa for a person? Says the Rambam, contemporary medical science. Nothing to do with treifas for an animal. Does not go back to Moses. It's just contemporary medical science. So someone says, look, the Talmud says X is a treifa condition for a person. Maimonides says that X is not a treifa condition for a person. So clearly you can reject the Talmud, and the Talmud can be wrong, and so forth and so on. It's just gross ignorance. Because the definition of treifa for a person is whatever medical science says in your time. That's the definition. So of course Maimonides will cite the science of his time. Doesn't apply to anything else. So you have to know the background for each statement. And that you can only get by reading. Yeah, what's not?
I have more. Yeah. I obviously you're an educated man. Like most of your education came from your secular days when you were studying university. So how do you, like I know you probably send your kids to Hasidic schools. They probably don't have the same education that you have. Do you want them to have the same education that you had? On the secular subjects?
Yeah, first of all, just as a matter of, I guess, I hope justifiable pride, it's not true that most of my education came from my secular days. If you would see the hundreds and hundreds of dollars that I spent today buying science books and philosophy books and so on and so on, articles that I read, I keep up with these things. Now, maybe you've been able to tell from my offhand political remarks that I am a repentant liberal. I'm a strong believer in the motto that if you're not a liberal at age 20, you have no heart, and if you're still a liberal by 30, you have no brain. I really no patience for liberals. But here and there, much to my, I would say, embarrassment, are some things in which I take a liberal line. And education is one where I take a liberal line. I don't think you have one size fits all. I think it depends very much on the background, the talents, the niche that the person is going to fit in. My Rabbi Zatzal read the New York Times, he read the Boston Globe, he knew everything that was going on, and anyone could talk to him about anything, and he always understood, and he always had something to contribute. He always felt that he was on the same page with him. There are others who know absolutely nothing about the what's going on in the world. And there's a third possibility. There's a fellow at MIT, a professor of engineering, a genius. He's the CEO of 5 startup companies because he's working in certain kinds of biomedical engineering. Professor at MIT, and he's about tshuva. And he told me, he went to Rabbi Yosef, a couple of years before he was nifter, and asked him about a very complicated question in cell research, cloning and various things. And he told me, first of all, he understood everything that I said. That's when Rabbi Yosef was 98. He understood everything that I said, and he had some remarks to make that we hadn't thought of, and he gave me guidance on how I should deal with it. So knowing the Torah can give a person sometimes access to things beyond what's strictly Torah. But I don't think one size fits all, and I think that there has to be room for people with different approaches to what they want to learn, what they want to master. The Greeks said, and I think we'll have to be telling the Torah. I think Rabbi Yonah says something similar. That the ideal education is you should know something about everything and everything about something. Which means there should be one subject that you really push through to the end, so you know what depth is. You know what it means to master something. You know what it means to have everything organized, integrated, and explained. On the other hand, you should have some brush with everything else, because otherwise lack of depth doesn't give you enough perspective. The one that you've mastered reminds you always that, of the extra depths in the other ones that you're not getting, so you won't be taken in by what you see superficially. I think a similar thing is relevant. And how you balance breadth and depth and where you choose to put your emphasis is going to vary from person to person. So I don't regret at all that my children don't have the kind of education that I do, though some of them have there are Haredi institutions today that give secular education and grant even secularly recognized degrees. And some of my children have some of those things. But why should the world be all philosophers? Why should the world be all mathematicians? I see no intrinsic value in it whatsoever.
You mentioned that there are times where Chazal trace something back to prophecy and then science comes and rejects it or it seems to contradict it. Are there any examples of that today?
Sure. I mean, take the age of the universe, right? That's direct prophecy. But it's very interesting that we have a number of cases where this has went on for centuries, and where in the end Chazal were vindicated. Until very recently, it was all medical science agreed that a liver will not regenerate. It gets to be certain low, a certain size, and it just will die. It will not regenerate. The Talmud says that a diseased liver with, I think, 2 kazesim left, 2 olive-sized pieces left, is not considered a treifa. It can regenerate. And only in the last 50 years, 70, 80 years, have they discovered that the liver can regenerate. So, we were having a discussion 100 years ago. We said, well, look, science knows the liver doesn't regenerate, so the Talmud has to be wrong. But as a matter of fact, science was wrong. And this happens over and over again. If you read the history of science, and you read the number of times they've had to change their minds, even practical science, even experimental science, I'm not talking about theoretical science, and they get it wrong. So you begin to realize that a lot of it is speculation. I'll tell you something you can check in the history books. You look it up, like I said, Wikipedia. When I was a kid, you bought a pair of shoes. There was a machine, a stand-up frame, and there was a slot. You put your feet with the new shoes into the slot, and there was a viewer. You looked down, you pressed the button, and you saw the bones of your feet inside the shoes to make sure you had a good fit. You were X-raying your feet to check your shoe fit. We don't do that anymore. Can you guess why? Because it's not good for you, right? You're exposing yourself to radiation to check whether your shoes fit or not, right? My sister-in-law had what's called a birthmark. A birthmark is where the skin is very erupted and rubbery, and it's usually scarlet red, and it's very disfiguring. And she had it on her neck, so they burned it out with radiation. Radiation, the hottest stuff, the newest stuff. Yeah, but they did serious damage to her thyroid gland, which then we discovered decades later, and has to live with that. And, lobotomies, tens of thousands of lobotomies were done in order to stop seizures. And there was no proof ever that they really succeeded. And these people ended up with gigantic loss of function. And experimental science has its, I don't know if you read about this too, in the last 15 years, they're the A and B type personalities. A-type personalities, you're looking at one. Active, aggressive, with a lot of different pots on the fire and a lot of things going and running from one thing to the next, full of energy and with a high expectance of heart attack. And then there are the laid-back people, either from Ohio or Los Angeles, take things easy, they have time. And these are people who have much lower incidence of heart attacks. And there were training centers and psychology centers to help an A-type personality become a B-type personality. It was based on a statistical mistake. That's all. Lasted about 7, 8 years. Turned out the math was wrong, and they just got it wrong. I remember also about that time, worldwide falling sperm rates. All over the world. Sperm rates are falling. The end of the human race. Why? Obviously, it's got to be pollution, right? What else could be doing it worldwide? It was also a statistical mistake. They did the math wrong. That lasted for 2 or 3 years. So if you live through enough of these, so science says so today. Now, if you're interested in this subject, I have a book to recommend to you. It's already a classic. It's called Genesis and Genes. Genesis and Genes by Yoram Bogacz. Bogacz is spelled the way the Polish do, B-O-G-A-C-Z. Published by Feldheim. And if you want beautifully researched examples of this sort of thing, it's a book with over 500 footnotes. You just take a look. I'll just give you one example, which
Genesis and Genes?
Genesis and Genes. Suppose you have independent lines of research, all of which come to the same conclusion. 4 different independent investigations that all come to the same conclusion. Doesn't that have to be right? When they're independent and nothing to do with them, they all arrive at the same conclusion. Well, here's one. As of 1900, the age of the Earth, not the universe, but the Earth, was estimated to be between 50 and 100 million years, certainly not any older than that. Why? Because you have you have the cooling of the earth. The earth is losing heat to space. And if it's older than that, the earth would have to be frozen solid. And you have the salination of the oceans. Salt is washing from the shore, from the dry land into the oceans, and you can see how much water washes in, see how much salt it's contributing, measure the salinity of the oceans, and the earth were older than that, the oceans would have to be much more saline, have much more salt. And there is the water flowing into the ocean, which takes away rock and earth from the path, the channel of the river, like let's say the Colorado River. And you can calculate how much it takes off per year and how deep the ravine can be that's dug by the river, like the Grand Canyon. And you can figure out how many years this has been going on. And when it's been going on for more than 100 million years, the ravines will be much deeper. And fourthly, the way the solar system is set up, it won't be stable for more than 50 to 100 million years. After that, it's going to come apart. So the Earth cannot be more than 100 million years old. Okay, boys and girls, that's off by a factor of 50. It's 50 times as old. That's a pretty big mistake, according to their picture. It's a pretty big mistake. So yes, if you have 4 completely independent lines of investigation, they all arrive at the same conclusion, they could all be dead wrong. Yes, they could. So, I'm a lot older than you guys, and I've lived through a bunch of these. Okay. So that's what they say today. So, yeah, nobody else has anything to ask? Yeah.
Back to education. Do you think we should rely on the Goyim for medical service, or should we have Jewish doctors?
But Moshe was asked that question, and he said, our job is to study Torah. And if the Goyim will be our doctors, wonderful. There's absolutely no reason why we have to invest a Jew's mind in if we are doing what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants from us in serving Him, the rest of it we're taken care of by Him.
This was a question I was trying to ask earlier, but if a person, when a person takes a risk which is warranted, it means it's mutter for him to do it. Or on the other hand, when he takes a risk which isn't warranted, how do I explain it? Let's say he gets where it is warranted, and he still has a negative outcome. Is that sort of within the calculation of suffering or reward and punishment he would have had in any case? Or when a person takes a risk which isn't mutter, and he doesn't get the negative outcome, is he punished just as badly as, let's say, someone who does get the negative outcome, and therefore he does that mitzvahs and he's moved up to Torah and he's all that?
Okay, let's try to clarify the question a little bit. You are making an assumption, the way you put the question, that all suffering is punishment.
No, I recognise I'm missing a lot.
But that's, well, okay, let's go through it piece by piece. Not calling you down, not criticizing you, but let's get some clarity, right? There's no reason whatsoever. Many say that suffering is not necessarily punishment. Number one. Number two, even if, like the Rambam writes, and maybe the Ramban agrees as well, even if all suffering is punishment, it doesn't follow that if I do X at 10 o'clock and I get a piece of suffering at 11 o'clock, that 11 o'clock is connected to 10 o'clock. 11 o'clock might be close to the last year or last decade. In general, God does not reveal the reasons for what He does. Now, given that, I say that to just forestall the temptation to say, oh, why did this happen to me? Well, I did that, so this happened. And I think that's very dangerous. I think we have no right to do that. But if a person is doing something which is completely permissible to do, and there was nothing better or more appropriate that he should have been doing at the time, then of course he can't be punished for doing that. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is just. That's where Maimonides gets his principle from, and he repeats it at least a dozen times, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is just. So if you do what's permissible and right, you can't be punished for that. That would be just unjust. Would be unfair.
But you can still have the cause of suffering from something you've done, even though it's permitted?
Again, here, let me try to put it in precise terms. You have a person, you have his whole life, and he did X. Now, it can't be that X is perfectly okay, and because of X, some element of suffering was added to his life. That can't be, because that's unjust. It could be that because of some cue he did 6 years ago, when he does X that's permissible now, it physically causes the suffering. That could be. But it can't be God's reason for the suffering, because that would be totally unjust. Right? The unjust things like that don't happen. Yeah.
I'm going back for the summer for about a month or so to visit family and friends. How do I explain to those who have basic knowledge the importance and the depth of what I'm doing without sounding crazy?
It's a very easy answer, very simple answer to the question. You don't. I have a long share on this, but let me give you the outline because this is very important. We're coming to the summer now. The people at home are going to assume that you are a raving fanatic. Nothing you do will live that down, but you don't have to reinforce it. You don't have to give reason to think it. Don't convert them. Don't prove to them how right you are. Don't display how beautiful your way of life is. Don't leave the book on the coffee table by accident, where they can see it. And oh, did you happen to see my book on the coffee table? The one that proves that you have to keep Shabbos? Yeah, I mean, that's the one I write, right? No. The best thing you can do is present yourself as calm, self-confident, happy, with direction, with focus, with goals, with a sense of achievement, and a sense of challenge for the future, and direction for the future. When you're challenged, I recommend almost always don't respond. If you're challenged and you don't respond, that doesn't give the other person the victory, especially if the person challenges in an aggressive way. Everyone listening is going to stop. When you don't answer, is going to say, man, he sounds aggressive. He sounds like he's upset. I wonder why he's so upset. Why is he charging in like that? Whereas if you answer him in kind, oh, they don't like each other, they have a battle, then they immediately equalize everything. Don't let them equalize everything. So he says to you, everybody knows that religion is just working out your Freudian fantasies. You say, thank you for sharing with me. I'm interested to hear your point of view. No, don't take the bait. Don't take the bait.
Let them all go Sukkot, Mechalel Shabbat, the whole lives.
You're not going to make the difference. That's what I'm telling you. You're not going. No, then they'll just say, "Aha!" You see, they're not going to listen to it. They're not going to listen to it. They'll just say, "You see, he's a fanatic." And not only that, but you come across, and probably this is to a certain extent true, you come across as so defensive. You can't stand to be around people who disagree with you. That's because you're really not sure of yourself. If somebody came in and said, the sky is blue, the sky is pink, and 2 + 2 is 5, would you fight with him? You wouldn't bother to fight with him. Come back slugging, that means you're protecting yourself. You're really not sure of yourself. You're really defensive, really insecure. That's not the position that you want to portray. You want to, you have your life, I have my life. I respect you because of where you came from. I respect your general values. I can disagree with you, but you don't have to take up that challenge. And if a person pushes you, you can test it. You could say, that question, I know somebody who knows how to answer that question. He's on a website. Here's the address. He can give you the answer to that question. The next time you see that person, you say, by the way, did you ever look up that website that I gave you? Did you ever, write to the guy on the website? And he'll have to admit that he didn't, which means he's not interested in the answer. He's just interested in poking you. Well, don't allow yourself to be poked. Don't allow yourself to be poked. It never works. It never works. If you have someone who cares about you and is really open-minded and who says, look, I can't ever imagine being like you. And I'm not contemplating it, but I know you. If a parent say, I love you, I'd like to understand you. Can you share with me where you're coming from? Then by all means. And then I think the best thing to do is to introduce that person to someone beyond yourself. I said, listen, here's a website that I use. Let's get down what's on this website about that. And let's read it together. Let's read it together, discuss it together. That way, you're doing more than just answering it yourself, but you're introducing that person to a connection, which may be very useful to that person. But don't undertake the struggle. Don't engage in the battle. It's doomed. It's doomed. By the way, don't forget to show interest in what they're interested in. How does the average letter go from a Talmud yeshiva to home? I learned this and I learned that and I went there and I went to Kever Rachlan and we davened and so on and so on.
Yeah.
Had a nice week, love to hear from you. What about them? Well, they're just leading their old humdrum lives. They're not doing anything. I'm doing something. Something's happening to me. I'm really growing, They're just stuck. That's not nice. May not even be true, but it's certainly not nice. Show some interest in what they're interested in. We had a boy here 34 years ago, and he went home for the summer. A very well-to-do family, I think, in North Carolina. And he asked me what to do. I said, what is your father interested in? He said, my father loves to play golf. I said, offer to play golf with him. He looked at me like I landed from the moon. Rabbi, that's hitting a ball with a stick into a cup. Why should I do that? I said, trust me. Trust me. Offer to play golf with him. He did it 3 times. At the end of the summer, before he came back, Father said to him, I respect you.
How's that?
When he came back, I said to him, were the 3 golf games worth those 3 words? Because what that says is, I care about you. I'm not denying you. I'm not telling you that your life is worthless. I once heard someone who today has a reputation. I heard him speaking to a group of boys in the yeshiva, and he said, anyone who doesn't keep the Torah, keep the mitzvos, his life is worthless. It's as if he never lived. I thought to myself, you're talking about all their parents and all their siblings and all their friends. How can you say something like that? So I think that by building a bridge on your own to where they are, you'll be able to, in the end, get a hearing for where you are, if a hearing is wanted. Sometimes when a question comes up and you think the other person is really listening, I recommend to put it this way. I can understand how someone with your education and your life experience would see it the way you do. Now notice, vocabulary is very important. Education is a positive word. Life experience is a positive word. And then say, I hope you can understand how someone with a somewhat different education and somewhat different life experience would see it differently. All you're asking for is an equal hearing. Very hard, if you're American, not to give an equal hearing, not to play fair. I mean, some people do hard things, but it's not easy to do that. And then you can hopefully open the person up to hear less subjectively and less defensively what it is you have to say. These are the things that are elementary in interpersonal relations, and I don't think you should look for that goal of inspiring them or showing them how deep it is and so on and so on. If you have some point of contact, my mother, Lo Shalom, was a lawyer, so sometimes I would say to her, look, we learned something which I think is part of any legal system. I'd like to describe it to you. I'd like to hear what you have to say about it. So I'm inviting her into the discussion, not telling her, look how great I am and look how deep it is and so on and so on. I'm inviting her into the discussion. And she appreciated that. You can build a connection where the other person has a say. The other person can also contribute, not just listen to you and ooh and ah over how great you are. That can have a positive role. Yeah.
Rambam writes, I don't know which sefer, but he writes that someone who learns all day, I'm sure you heard that, it doesn't work or just relies on, tzedakah, gets no schar for learning. You know what I'm referring to?
It doesn't say gets no schar for learning. He says it's a chil Hashem, and he says it in the. But I want you to know, until he was 35, how did he live?
Off his brother, not off the community.
Correct. That's right. But that means, and I want you to know, all the other Rishonim disagree with him. All the other Rishonim disagree with him. So this is where a group picks and chooses which source they'd like to cite. But they're all, and the Beis Yosef in his commentary on that Rambam gives all the reasons against it, and the Shulchan Aruch passes against it. So that Rambam is of historical interest and Talmud Torah interest, has nothing to do with the psak that's been accepted by Klal Yisrael.